Hello, and welcome to the Corny Turn podcast. My guest today is a return, Matthew Raymer. He is a hero to those of us in the independent media space. He's the founder of ContentSafe, and we'll see where the conversation goes today. It is always an interesting discussion with him, so I'm excited and very curious to see where it will go. We thought we might start with talking about Jack Ellul, although I think I'm mispronouncing it, but I have his book on propaganda as per his request, and it is a fascinating read. I've, of course, read Bernays' book on propaganda and several others. Particularly Bernays was a large part of my study because of Tavistock and, psychological propaganda. But Ellul really talks much more about what's very relevant today because he talks about it in reference to technology. And I think we are very much watching the technocracy loom, and we are also seeing the, not that it's new, but we're seeing the effects of cybernetics with all of these algorithms who are data mining us and then programming us and siloing us and creating all of these warring factions, whether they be online or, a lot of them translate to IRL in real life, which, shows you the power of these algorithms. So the propaganda is definitely quite powerful. And I think that these cybernetic feedback loops are very concerning. So that's kind of the world we're living in today. So Matthew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Very good.
Yeah. So, firstly, for those who haven't seen the first episode we did, let's give a little background. Tell me a little bit about your history, what you're doing with ContentSafe, and anything you want to share.
Well, thumbnail, because I've had a very eclectic life.
Yes.
I was born in the U.S., Louisville, Kentucky, raised in southern Indiana for most of my early education, moved to South Central Kentucky, not too far north of you. Whenever I was toward the end of high school, got a very obsession with computers and science, and ended up getting a triple major in math, computer science, and physics. And I was set to get a PhD in computational physics, emphasizing solid state. And I burned out. So whenever I burned out, I burned out. I burned out hard. And I decided I did not want to get a PhD in physics, even though I did have perfect grades whenever I left. Probably the reason I burned out was because I had perfect grades.
In 3 majors. Right. Yeah.
And I had a friend that I met while I was in graduate school that was starting a business in Hong Kong. So I got an open invitation to come and visit him and his family. While I was between degrees, I was switching from physics to a master's in computer science. And I met my future wife, proposed to her, and then came back a year later, married her in Manila. And in the next year, I came back to live here, and we had thought to migrate back to the U.S., but we liked living here so much, and we had our first child already. We said no. We skipped the green card interview, and I got my residency here.
Wow.
And I have been here ever since. We've done multiple businesses. We've had a pharmacy. We've had an internet cafe. And the main breadwinner has been consulting with international firms outside of the country. That's led me to work with the UK government for a while. Then I did corporate consulting for about a decade. In 2015, I had a falling out with one of my business partners, and I went solo again. That led me to eventually come up with the idea of ContentSafe. And I've been promoting ContentSafe since 2018. The whole idea behind ContentSafe is that I can automate the process of distributing videos for people. And this has kind of grown over time into something more than that, that we're actually trying to do data analysis and providing tools to content creators to help their content be more accessible.
Which is awesome, because we know it's very difficult for those of us who the algorithms do not love. So, yes.
Yeah, and there's so much more we could do. And, we can, if we get a chance today, we can talk a bit about where I think content creators need to be going. But let's talk about Elliot.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we'll end on that, because I think that, that would be interesting for people to hear. And I'm very curious. So, let's start with Eliul and propaganda. So he had kind of a different notion of propaganda than what was traditional.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of good to step back and talk a bit about Eliu's background.
Yeah.
Eliu came from the aristocracy in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
His grandfather was a shipping magnate,
mm-hmm.
and he lost his shipping empire to pirates, which is interesting. Well, but his dad was still wealthy,
mm-hmm.
but his dad also lost money during the crash of World War I, the European crash of World War I.
Mm-hmm.
So Eliu had to support his family by teaching Latin and all sorts of languages, because this guy was a polyglot. He was an absolute genius.
Mm-hmm.
And he ended up supporting his parents whenever they lost all their wealth.
Wow.
This led him to encounter Marxism, which later Eliu would be considered the foremost authority on Marxism in France.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, right. You can read his book Marx and Jesus sometime.
Okay.
He was a Marxist expert, but he never fully adopted Marxism as a philosophy,
mm-hmm.
because he felt that it was flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was flawed because of his understanding of technology and what he would call technique.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding Eliu, you've got to understand what he meant by technique.
Mm-hmm.
He did not mean only machinery. He meant methods.
He meant
anything
like the Greek translation. I'm guessing he had, as if he taught Latin, he probably understood some Greek. Yeah.
And back then, amongst the early sociologists, and some people classify him as a sociologist, one of the first,
mm-hmm.
They would talk about technique, but now they don't call it technique anymore. They call it rationalization. So if you were ever going to look into this, you should look into studies in rationalization. Mm-hmm. And it's always an obscuring of, picking words that the average person doesn't really understand, so that they can, hide what they're doing. Eliu felt that technique was self-propagating. In other words, I often like to compare it to technology flows through humanity like a wave flows through water,
mm-hmm.
and that no one in particular controls it. Now, one of the foremost techniques is propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And I've argued that whenever we talk about technocrats, how could we say someone is incompetent but they're the head of, say, disease control? And we say, well, that person is incompetent in terms of the science of disease control, but yet they're the head of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's because the heads of all these organizations are propagandists.
Yes.
They're not experts in that field.
Right.
So that explains a great deal of what we've seen over the last 5 to 6 years, is that these people are not experts in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
They're just experts in crowd manipulation.
Mm-hmm. Which is
I'm glad.
What? Sorry to interrupt, but isn't that actually what under Wilson? That's what they described the experts to be. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And this was how they created the administrative state.
And the way it's sold to the public, though, is that the reason that these people are put in those positions is because they know best about those areas.
Right.
But in fact, that's not really true. What's going on.
As we've seen, yes. Yeah.
Right. For me, Elihu, one of his observations from the book Propaganda that I thought was very pertinent, if he went to watch a movie, he said, I don't watch the movie. I watch how the audience reacts to the movie.
Right.
So I know people love to do film analysis, and that's fine. You can do film analysis, but if you do that film analysis without actually seeing what was the effect at large to people watching the movie, what was the impact of that movie, then you're completely missing the message of the movie.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. So I did, I had like a summer at NYU where I did screenwriting and film study, and they would have these screenings where we'd have to watch the movie, and most of them were old movies, so I'd seen the movie, and I would always watch the room. So, and I remember I do reports on like how the room responded to it. Of course, my professors didn't love this so much, but I thought it was really relevant. I'm like, well, this is the impact that it was having. So if you're trying to just, you're trying to learn the techniques of directing and cinematography, you want to know how it's affecting your audience. So, yeah.
Right. And Elihu also had this insight that if you were going to be an effective propagandist, you could not believe what you're saying.
Oh.
Because you need to be able to change your message based on where you want the audience to go.
Right, the feedback.
So if you came to believe your message, then you're completely missing the point of the propaganda.
Right.
He said Goebbels ultimately failed as a propagandist because he began to adopt and believe the message that he was conveying.
Right.
This is why psychopaths are the best technocrats.
Right, because they can distance themselves. Yeah.
And they can lie without flinching, that they don't have any blush
They're not emotionally
response
invested.
whenever they lie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is why whenever, I don't know who wrote the book, but what was it? The Wisdom of Psychopaths is that book that was floating around.
I'm blanking, but yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Psychopath.
That is someone who's really disconnected from reality.
Yeah.
Or it's someone who is trying to be a good propagandist.
Right. Well, they say that psychopaths actually, they say that because the big misconception about psychopaths is that they have no empathy, right? They don't know empathy. They don't understand empathy. But it's actually not that. It's that they're not impacted by it. But they understand it very well, and they're able to use it they weaponize empathy. They're able to use it to manipulate others.
I've often said in discussions like this that a person who is going to affect the larger society almost has to be a sociopath.
Right. Yeah.
Because the things that they say, they cannot be so emotionally affected by it that it's like me. I know myself very well, and I can get involved in something at a low level where I don't feel that much emotional impact. But if I were put in a higher level, no, I could not handle that.
Right.
That's just not me.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I could at any level. I tend to be very passionate. So, like, what you see is what you get. And I tend to read everything on my face. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's not bad. I think that's how we're intended to be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's how we relate to each other. It's that all those nonverbal cues that's we saw in the past 5 years. Why that was so detrimental when people didn't have those. So
yeah. I've often said in business, if you can be moderately successful online as a business person, but if you can put yourself face to face with people, the opportunities multiply times 100. Compared to if you were just doing it in Zoom.
Yes. Yeah. There's some people who feel like they can relate to you. They feel like they get to know you. It becomes personal, even though they don't, but you build the personal relationship. Yeah. So, yeah, with this, I just find it really fascinating with what we're watching today with like social media. But it's really not just social media. It's really just the technology that now with AI, but it's all these different portals that people are immersed in. And so much of what they're being fed is algorithmic. It is a cybernetic feedback loop. So,
Yeah.
and propaganda is operating through it, but it's operating targeting you. So he talks about that. He talks about how it's personal, but yes, in a mass scope. So
Right.
I think that we're really seeing that. You know, he talks about the cult of the hero, which is kind of cult of personality, similar to that. And I don't think that that's a a new concept or necessarily specific to technology. I mean, certainly, obviously, that was kind of Captain Obvious. But I think technology heightens it because of the cybernetics. So the data, you're being data mined, so they kind of know what you're, what you like, what has an impact on you, what might emotionally trigger you, and they also know what you interact with, and so they put you into kind of a group, an audience, a target audience based on that. And then you get fed things based on those. And then certain people prop up because they may have larger presences in those spheres. And that becomes
Well,
self-replicating, right? It becomes amplifying.
and I think that this is a lot of what's behind the personality tests
Oh, yeah.
that we see. But one thing that's a kind of a glimmer of hope in that is that I have dabbled a bit in this with the
Okay.
personality tests, and I am acquainted with some people who are very high level experts at this.
Okay.
And what they tell me is that the conventional tests are wholly inadequate to classify people. So, in fact, they're working on a system that they think is more accurate, which is kind of it's a positive in some sense, but it's a negative in other senses because now you've got this system for understanding how to manipulate people, right?
So wait, they're saying it's only applicable in the classified sense, like those tests are the only ones that are really valid. Is that what you're saying, or?
Oh, no, no, no. What I'm saying is that the tests you see out there, like the Big Four or all these, are wholly inadequate. That
Right. Okay.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
don't really
I thought
give
you were
you a solid idea of what the possibilities are.
right. They're more just
And
like people to feel good, and
right,
it's
they're
training.
these systems are getting even more detailed, trying to identify people like you and me who are like intuitive, creative people
Right.
and figuring out how to manipulate us.
Yes.
Now, if they hear this, sorry, I don't mean to, you know, I don't think these people have that in mind, but I think that if they're right, then the people who do want to use it for manipulation will use it that way.
Well, isn't that I mean, I've done quite a bit of studying on like the GATE project and the affiliated GATE
Uh-huh.
project, right? And that
Mhm.
basically what the evidence shows is that's why they were studying like creatives and was
What other motivation would they have? Would they be doing it to help us?
well, it definitely didn't help me.
I
I
don't
remember
think
day
that.
one. That's all. I have no recollection of the entire program, which is crazy. I have a very good memory. Yeah, it's like a blank in my life. Like that's a blank spot. I remember nothing. I just
See,
remember
I
the first
was
day.
I was one of those weird ones that I got into gifted and talented late.
Okay.
I was not put into it in elementary school. It was
Well,
in middle and nearly high school before they put me in
yeah,
gifted and
me
talented.
too. I was late too.
But I had friends that got in at kindergarten,
Yeah, yeah.
and
I
for me,
might.
they just kept.
Yeah,
And I think it came down to that I'm an extreme creative intuitive.
yeah.
So it was difficult. Like I kept being put back in things. So I got put back in reading. They said, well, because he's, still making the same mistakes he made before. So we want to keep him back. And I'm like, well, okay. And then I got put back in math. And then my mom made a scene at a PTA meeting and I
Oh,
got put up in math and my grades improved. And
yeah,
she said, bored.
yeah.
That's why he's not doing it.
Oh, it's so funny. That actually happened to me in nursery school. They had asked my mom if I should skip, and my mom said no. We had family members who, like my great grandmother, skipped like sixth grade or something, 6 grades, and so my mom said no. We want her to actually be in school, and they said, oh well, it's probably for the best because she spends the whole day staring out the window anyway. She's like daydreaming. So,
That
yeah,
that describes me.
yeah.
Yeah, that describes me
Which
very
yeah,
much
the
so.
imagination and yeah. But I think, that's what they're what were you gonna say?
I remember once, I don't remember a whole lot from elementary school, but I remember once it being in like third grade, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the girls next to me was like fretting, like, oh, the test is going to be so hard. I need to study really hard tonight. I had never studied
Right.
at all. I just show up
Show up.
and take the test.
Right.
And right. And it was funny because, and this isn't about me, it's about Eliu, but let me just
Right,
say
yeah.
this is an anecdote. I had an occasion, not an occasion, I had a whole sequence of tests. We all had all those tests.
Right.
And I get to like seventh grade, and I'd always used to stress out over those tests because there's no way to prepare for them, right? You just go in, you take them.
Yeah.
And people were like wanting you to be somehow doing something to do well on them.
Right.
Well, I just said, screw this. I'm just going to put down whatever I think the answer is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get out of here.
Right.
6 months later, I get called to the counselor's office.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, we're curious why your scores are so high.
Oh.
It was almost like she was saying, we don't think you're that smart.
Right. Did you cheat?
And I'm like, did I cheat on the standardized test?
You're like, how?
How,
Right.
and it was at that day that I decided I despise counselors.
Mm. Fair enough.
And I also began to understand that, like, no, that's not the way I think. Though, if I get into a topic like Eliu,
Mm-hmm.
I took a year off from my business. I delegated all my work. I read Eliu for a year.
Wow.
And I only got through 5 books, just to tell you, because you go back and you read. Do I really understand what this guy's saying?
Right.
And you come out the other side with, like, I've met online the president of the International Eliu Foundation.
Ooh, okay.
And I was sorely disappointed in him. I thought, because by his own admission, he had never read a work of Eliu.
What? And he's the president of the Eliu Foundation? Wow.
Yeah, I have it. I have it in my International Jacques Eliu Society.
Yeah, I looked at
he
that.
He admits it. I've got it in email. He said, I've never really read any Eliu. Why did he get that position?
Yeah.
Because he was a Charbonneau scholar, and Eliu and Charbonneau were contemporaries. Charbonneau has a higher standing in French society than Eliu does.
Oh, and so he appointed him, or?
Yes, he got appointed because of his position in the French academia.
Wow. Okay.
So, and he said very inaccurate things about the relationship between Charbonneau and Eliu. For instance, they were best friends. No, they weren't. They were not best friends. They were contemporaries, and they did work together. They did.
Colleagues.
But whenever Eliu was interviewed in like the 1980s, and they said, how much of your work, this is beautiful, this is so French whenever he said this, how much of your work is influenced by Charbonneau? And his response was, Charbonneau? My wife has more influence than Charbonneau does.
Well, one would hope, actually, on that. Yeah, that's fair. But that's funny. Wow.
Yeah.
He's just
and he was an absolute character. I mean, he had what he called his 12 disciples.
Okay.
And
Eliu?
he didn't.
Or Charbonneau?
Eliu.
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 That's 12.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you all 12,
Okay.
but I'm trying to remember there was this one guy who did early medical skepticism.
Oh.
It does not come across my head just yet, but he was big in the 1970s. And he was one of those disciples of Elihu. And Elihu deliberately did not want to go mass. He did not believe in mass movements. He wanted things to be low level
Mm-hmm.
and it to percolate outward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he succeeded at it. I think
Like
that,
you would think of as grassroots.
yeah,
Yeah.
that he didn't want it to be top down. He
Right.
wanted it to be bottom up.
Right.
And I do believe that ultimately bottom up is more powerful than top down.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially how H.G. Wells said the world brain would be created. Decentralization, yeah, through laterally.
Though I think it's harder for you to do that in a quick way.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely takes more time. Yeah.
And that's why I think some of the more interesting speculations that I've listened to in the last month or 2 months have been that we're being fed a line of 2030 as being somehow big, but maybe that's only a small baby step toward 2050,
I
which
think
could be much
2045
bigger.
is the big 2045 is their big goal. So you've got obviously the AI World Society where they say that's going to be 2045, kind of their big, launch for that.
Yeah.
You have, of course, Ray Kurzweil says the singularity is nearer. He has a new book, and he says
Yeah.
5. Game B. I don't know if you're familiar with Game B, but Jim
No, I
Rutt.
don't
So
know
Game
that.
B is pretty interesting. I kind of had a theory that the IDW. I've done a lot of presentations on Game Bs. I can send you quite a bit of stuff on it.
Oh, sure,
I
please.
think tomorrow we're going to do a little podcast that AI did of it's a shorter version of my presentation that it's like it adapts it so kind of get the bite size analysis of it. But my thesis was that the IDW was like an influence operation for it, and I've actually found an article that pretty much says that. So I think that and I can send you that as well. But
Oh,
it's
sure.
but it is, but Jim Rutt is kind of like the grandfather of Game B, and he did a Medium article like outlining a blueprint for it. I think he started it in 2018, then he updated it in 2020, and I think he's updated it since then. But there was a lot of movement in 2020, even though this goes all the way back to 2011. That's when the concept kind of started. So talking about these grassroots movements, right? But it started out of he called it the Stanton meetings, and they were really trying to create a political movement, the Emancipation Party. So this is kind of part of that trans-political movement that I really think is something people should be watching right now. Trans-political is a big movement, and I'm very concerned about it because while it sounds great, a lot of people, are aware that there might be kind of a dialectic between left and right or whatever political system you're in. However, the trans-political movement is to create a collectivist movement. That's the purpose of it. It's not really to dissolve the bipartisanship. It's to create Hegelian synthesis. But all this to say that in his On Journey to Game B, he talks about where the proto Game Bs will really come to life is 2045. And this is not a man who is a Luddite. This is someone, he was the CEO of like Network Solutions. He was a chairman at Santa Fe Institute. He has a really interesting history. He had created something called evolutionary software. He was on the ground floor of like the venture capital raising for what became T-Mobile. So, he has a very interesting history. He's clearly a very bright guy. And I don't think he's his plans are, although what I think he's building, it will end up being a scientific dictatorship. It's kind of this utopian vision that I think will end up in dystopia. But I don't think he's sinister in his plans. I just think that he really has kind of this utopian view of this
Honestly,
decentralized.
I think the vast majority of the academics out there are completely lost.
Yeah.
Yeah. They think they know what's going on, but they have no clue what's going on because they're so siloed in
Yes.
their own fields.
Yes.
And
Well, and
it's funny, I did not have the level of awareness I have now
uh-huh.
40 years ago. I mean,
Oh
I'm
yeah. I
55,
knew nothing 40
right?
years ago.
I remember being a last senior physics student and getting interviews with the other schools to go to graduate school. And I remember saying out loud two things. And
Mhm,
that was one, I believe in cross-disciplinary studies. I
mhm,
don't believe in silos. I didn't
mhm.
call it a silo,
Right.
but I was saying I believe in cross-disciplinary. And
Yes.
the other thing I said, I believe in the combination of the arts and the sciences. I don't think they should be separated from one another.
Thank you.
This was intuitive. It
Right.
was not something that that I had studied or that I understood how important that was. It was just a gut
Feeling.
feeling.
Hmm.
And it's developed into a confirmation over years. And actually not just, confirming because I want it to be true, but confirming it because experience keeps driving me back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so, so important. And they are, I think there's so many invested in intentionally compartmentalizing it. I always tell the story of when I was in school and like I was in the one like screenshot memory I had, but it happened so many times. But it was when I was in physics class and I had a light bulb moment about, Democritus creating, discovering atoms. And my physics teacher actually kicked me out of the classroom because he said, we're in science class. I don't know why you're talking about an ancient Greek philosopher. Like you need to pay.
Well, I
So,
had the I had the I had the opposite experience in
oh,
that I was sitting in an optics class
okay,
and my optics professor, who was like this guy, I've had a weird life.
yes,
This guy was a consultant for the UK Defense
wow,
Department.
okay,
Yeah, he was an optician.
yeah,
Whenever Desert Storm happened, he rolled the television in and he showed us smart bombs dropping on the top of buildings.
mm-hmm,
And he said, that was my research.
wow,
The same guy does a lecture,
uh-huh,
and in it, all he does for 1 hour is talk about how the human eye works. Now, it was a mystical experience for me. It was not a science experience.
mm-hmm,
And he made no comments about religion. He made no comments about spirituality. It was all about how the chemistry and optics of the human eye.
mm-hmm.
See, that's the way I think. I could take a materialistic explanation and turn
Right.
it into a mystical
So,
experience.
what was the mystical experience for you?
You can't just accidentally get that.
Right.
You, it's so complex.
Oh,
It
it.
involves dozens and dozens of complex chemical and mechanical things are
Yeah.
going on. And that doesn't just happen.
No.
So
No.
there's purpose in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I for a long time and this might be of interest to you, the whole genome project, right? I was really following it.
Mm-hmm,
They kept telling me
mm-hmm.
that they were going to come up with gene therapy for optic nerve regeneration and for hearing loss and all these things. So, we were tracking it because it was really super exciting, right? And they actually did figure out how to make the optic nerve regenerate to some extent. Like they were able to grow
Oh,
more optic nerve, which is amazing. It was in mice,
yeah, I
but
didn't know
I
that.
think they actually did it with guinea pigs too. But it was,
Hmm.
don't like, yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to go back and look, but I do remember with mice, and they were actually able to do that. But what they couldn't do is get the neural mapping to the brain because it's so complex. So, like, even if they were able to, they weren't able to grow much of the optic nerve anyway. But even if they were able to figure out how to grow the length that was necessary, they couldn't figure out the neural mapping to the brain because it was just so intricate. And yeah,
See,
that's kind of what you were realizing. It's so.
did you ever have, or were you a sci-fi fan?
I was when I was little. Yeah. But
I was a sci-fi fan probably up until my early 30s. I'm not really that big of a fan of anything like that anymore, but it did greatly influence me.
sure.
Babylon 5.
Okay.
Okay,
Love it.
the whole story of Babylon 5 is that you have these older races,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them is the shadows, which are the forces of darkness, and the Vorlons, who are the forces of light.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the it's kind of cute because the shadows are just spiders, and the the Vorlons are calamari.
Okay.
uh, but the Vorlons make a point because in one of the early episodes, this war criminal comes in who's been doing experiments on other races, extracting something from them that could give people eternal life.
Mm-hmm.
And she has the ability to synthesize this material, but it's at the expense of other people's lives.
Right.
And the Vorlons kill her. They blow up her ship. And the message that they give is, you're not ready for that.
Oh, wow.
You're not ready to live forever. Elihu's message is not unlike that, that we progress and we move forward and we think we're progressing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are we progressing toward? We have really no destination that we're headed toward. In
Right.
his work, the presence of the kingdom, he says that the ends have been consumed by the means. So we often say the ends
Yep.
justifies the means,
Right.
right? He says, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is that our means, our techniques have destroyed all our ends. We have no actual destination to go to. So we just keep moving in any direction that we think that we should go in just to progress. Make the jet plane faster. Well, why? Why would you need to make the jet plane faster? You're going nowhere fast.
Fast.
And his seminal work, The Technological Society, he says that technology is a death cult.
Well,
He said this can only lead to destruction. It can't lead anywhere else.
I think that's accurate. I mean, it's that the technocrats are basically building a transhuman agenda. So I call it the technological immanentization of the eschaton. So I think they're, it's Pete, right? Does that resonate for you?
Yeah. No, it's, but in his mind, in Elihu's mind, you
Yeah.
can't do that. So he didn't
Yeah.
believe that humans could bring about the kingdom of God. He said, that's not possible. Humans can't do that. He said, even if by some absolute miracle that you could get everybody on the same page,
Right.
you still can't bring about utopia.
Yeah. I think he's right. Yeah.
And what I see in this is, one, I see a barrier. Okay. I see a barrier. I see unanticipated problems that in their hubris, and there's no better word to describe this than hubris,
Mm-hmm.
they think that they can overcome any obstacle.
Right.
And this is why, as a young guy and more a materialist in the way I thought,
Right.
I thought, like, well, if we just keep doing this, we can accomplish this.
Right.
Now, being older and understanding, having seen humanity, I think that some of the more fringy Christian groups actually have it right. This is Luciferian.
I think so. That's what I've been pointing out. So I'm totally in agreement on that. And I think there's lots of evidence to substantiate that. I think a lot of their oral view is based in a Luciferian premise. It's it's
absolutely.
Gnostic and it's Luciferian. Yeah.
Yeah. In my mind, there's no question.
Yeah.
As to whether some of these things are metaphors or are they actual entities, well,
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
But You know what? I'm at the point where them being actual entities is on the table.
Right. Yeah. I'm there with you. I'm definitely there with you. Didn't Elon say, AI is summoning the demon, and then he said, yeah, you're going to trust the guy with the holy water and the inverted pentagram, and yeah, sure, it's all going to work out. It'll be okay. Says the guy who later says that he's building his supercomputer in Memphis, and it's because Memphis is the capital of Egypt. And he said, yeah, maybe that's where our next god will come from.
I've never trusted Elon.
Yeah.
Not even before this whole Doge thing. I didn't trust
Yeah.
him. I have been an anti-Elon guy since I first started looking into his mission to Mars stuff.
Yeah. Well,
And if you talk about a death cult, that's a death cult.
Well, I want to hear your thoughts on that, but I will just say this very quickly. I find it so fascinating because I had this whole theory that, and I don't know, this really is a theory. Like it's just kind of a gut instinct. I have no kind of evidence to corroborate it at all. But I have this theory that there's kind of like a underpinning of Knights of Malta. Yeah, the Baphomet and his satanic mother. But see, this underpinning of the Knights of Malta that was guiding the medical freedom movement, because the Knights of Malta were the Knights of Hospitalier initially, and they are, even now, their exoteric messaging is that they're medical charity. That's what they do. And I'm not, trying to disparage all Knights of Malta. I've met some. They're nice people. I'm sure not everybody in it is like doing some sort of satanic voodoo. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that when you look at the medical freedom movement, a lot of it does look like an operation to move the Overton window. And here's an example. So you had a lot of people who were traditionally on the political left, right? Like if we just look at it at, the whatever identity label they were on the political left wing. A lot of those people were anti-jabs, right? That was historically kind of, how they identified, and they were on the left. You had the medical freedom movement come in, and suddenly these people were like, I don't want to take experimental drugs, and I don't want anything shot in me. And suddenly that means they were right-wingers. And a lot of these people actually said, I don't understand. Like, now I'm a right winger or I'm a Republican. Like, it was confusing to them. And they're like, okay.
But I bought a Tesla.
Right. So this is where I'm going with that. Right. So they were all like, a lot of them were very confused. They're like, okay, well, I guess now I'm on the right wing. Now, you have people who a year ago would have rioted against, like, I don't mean literal riots because you're seeing that now, but, like they would have verbally spoken very harshly against electric vehicles, that whole green agenda and that climate nonsense narrative. And now these same people are rushing out to buy Teslas because of Elon. And my theory, like moving the Overton window, right? Now you've got all these people who are quote unquote Republicans, and they're rushing out to get their geofenced grid, essentially, that's going to track them.
Lemmings. I think the word lemmings comes to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit. It's really interesting to watch, though, because this is very much what I think this whole like trans-political movement is all about. It's just shifting the window. And it's not so much about left-right, but it's about creating the collectivist, right? It's the people who value individual free will versus the collective mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. A lot of sheepdogging going on where you're corralling people into a big herd.
Yes. Yeah. So I want to hear what your thoughts were on this whole Mars thing, because he's talking about how Mars is essential for the evolution, conscious evolution of humanity. Just that those
I think that I think that anyone who gets on his tin can to Mars is going to die. That's what I think. Well, we don't have adequate shielding for ships.
Right.
So what people should be paying very close attention to is a fake mission to Mars.
Right.
Well, because that's the more likely thing to happen.
Well, see, yeah, there hasn't been a whole lot of success with missions in general into outer space. Yeah, that has not
Well,
been super
I mean, I am not a moon landing denier, incidentally.
right.
But I do think it's possible that the footage we saw wasn't the actual footage.
It doesn't look like it was the actual footage. I will say that.
Yeah.
I mean, there was like a file
And
cabinet in one of them. Like, I'm like, this is
I heard that
odd.
there was like a Coke, a tin can or something floating around.
Yeah,
Some people claim they swear they saw that whenever
I
it was
haven't seen
aired on
that one, but
television.
yeah,
Me either, but secondhand, thirdhand
sure, yeah,
reports.
tertiary.
I consider that to be a big time sink, but I have spent a few hours watching people talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that the amount of solar radiation between us and Mars is so dangerous that the likelihood that they make it to the surface of Mars without getting cooked is small. And if they do make it to the surface of Mars, the chance that they're going to be able to construct something to shield themselves in
right,
time before they get cooked is even smaller.
right.
So I really think that this is just it's a narrative to try to keep us interested in technological progress is what I
Yeah,
but I don't think all space technology to me seems ultimately about controlling what's on Earth, not going out to the planets.
well, I think that that's very true with all the satellites, right? That they're creating. It's a great tracking surveillance grid.
Well, think about it. All of those missions in space stations, couldn't those same ideas be applied to closed cities that you're not allowed to get out of?
Yes, they could very much. So.
Right. So,
Yeah,
yeah, I think
a
that,
test blueprint. Yeah. Well, I'm curious
yeah,
your thoughts on just because this is such a big part of the narrative that I'm seeing, and this is in the technological space, and especially when you start looking into what's coming, with Web3. So they keep talking about how it's part of the quantum field. Quantum is a big buzzword. Um, so yeah, well, your face kind of said it all. So yeah, what are your thoughts there?
well, I remember being in physics and studying quantum
Right.
mechanics, okay?
It's
And one of my favorite professors, probably one of the most obnoxious ones, but one of my favorite, he was always pointing out to us that there were a dozen different outlooks to quantum mechanics.
yeah,
He said, there's not one. He said, there's dozens. There's over a dozen of these that schools of thought of what quantum mechanics mean.
yeah.
And some of those schools of thought reduce everything down into simple to understand, non woo woo terms.
Mm,
So whenever you hear the word quantum, you're being inserted into the woo woo zone of things that you don't think work, changing the way things work.
right.
And I think that that is a psychological thing as well. I think that you can explain satellites and GPS without invoking general relativity too.
Yeah.
And I think that the sun doesn't work the way we were taught that it works.
What do you
The
mean?
sun is not a nuclear furnace.
So
The
what?
sun is condensed matter, and it's in a huge university, galactic universe level electric grid. We have flows of protons and electrons that flow throughout the whole universe. They power our suns. So there's a whole, and I'm getting this from a physicist at Ohio State who's tenured and has over 100 papers.
Right.
This is not something you get from some guy online. This is
Right.
act, we have been lied to about the sciences immensely.
Yeah, it does seem that.
And I wonder, the heroes of science, we used to have Einstein up on a pedestal, but did any of his stuff actually make any sense? And you have the same professor working with a mathematician to say that actually everything Einstein did was nonsense for the
Yeah.
most part.
Well, I think it's interesting that Einstein, there's no real record of any of his lectures or anything,
I
which
had a professor
is odd.
who went, who was in, what school was it that Einstein ended up in? Was it Princeton or Stanford?
I don't know, actually. Yeah.
Or
Look it up.
I had a professor who actually was in the university while Einstein was there.
Really? Okay. What did he say?
He actually manipulated the situation to meet Einstein.
Wow. Okay.
They made up a question and they managed to get an audience just to get a chance to talk to him.
Wow.
And it really seemed like he was not really that big of a smart guy, because he knew what they were doing whenever they showed up in his office because of the nature of the question. And he entertained their question and then they had a chat and then they left.
Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, yes. I don't
Yeah.
have the school. Oh, it's Princeton. Yeah. Historical Princeton Society of Princeton.
So, these people, they're brands.
Yeah. Well,
Musk is a brand.
to steer
Trump is a
narrative.
brand. Einstein, right?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like Darwin was a brand as well.
He was a brand.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Have you ever heard of, Darwin's Enigma?
Darwin's Enigma.
Now, this is I don't know if you call this guy a Protestant or not.
Okay.
Sunderland. I don't think he was actually aligned with anyone in the Christian world. He was a secular guy.
Okay.
And Luther Sunderland. And what he points out is that everything that Darwin taught or wrote about,
Yeah.
his grandfather already had talked about.
Yeah. Erasmus. Yeah.
Right.
Erasmus.
And he's like, Darwin actually did, and he didn't give his grandfather any credit.
Which is just terrible. There was somebody else too, and I'm totally blanking on his name, but there was somebody else who claims that Darwin plagiarized him. I'll look it up really quickly because it's going to bother me.
Sure. And I have more to say about this, and
yes,
I think you and I talked a little bit about this in our call a month or two ago.
Okay. It was Patrick Matthew. That's who, right? I think so.
It's interesting that about 15 years ago, there was a huge movement to kind of resuscitate Darwin as a Christian.
What?
Yes. Yes.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, it is. But it had a purpose. And I happen to have been involved in this personally.
Oh, how so?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, at that, say 20 years ago, I was a young Earth creationist.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know some people are like, you were in physics, but you're also a young Earth creationist. Well, let me tell you what, guys. The idea that a young Earth creationist couldn't be an effective scientist is nonsense.
Yeah.
That's really has nothing to do with the sciences. And that was another narrative that was floating around about 15 years ago.
That was like you had to choose one or the other, right? You couldn't be
right. We have to change.
Science had to become your religion, is basically what that was.
Right. Well, essentially, that's what it was. It was getting a hardcore of not just American society, but global Christian society that was traditionalist to reject the idea of young Earth creationism. Okay. Now, they were selling it like, oh, it will make us progress in the sciences. That's the reason our children are doing poor in school is because they're still creationists. Like, okay, well, I actually bought into this 15 years ago.
Okay.
I, on chance, ran into some people that I won't give their names.
Okay.
But as I look back at them now, they're very suspicious people. Okay, that I don't think they had good motives, but they were connected to Francis Collins.
Oh, wow.
Because Collins released a book back then professing to be a Christian who believed in evolution.
Interesting.
And his whole narrative was he was homeschooled and all of these things. He was being painted in this conservative traditionalist light, and that he had saved the Human Genome Program because he went in and he finished it early and under budget.
Right.
Now we know that the Genome Project was an absolute failure and
Failure.
not a success,
Yeah. I don't think it was
right?
ever intended to be a success, though. That's my personal opinion. But
Probably.
yeah.
But Collins had managed to woo a certain percentage of young, impressionable traditionalists
Right.
over into the scientism camp, creating what they called evolutionary creationism.
Yeah.
And there's a guy, a Canadian, Dennis Lamoureux,
Right.
that wrote a big, thick book. I have it up on my bookshelf, justifying, evolutionary creationism. And he and Francis Collins were big on resuscitating Darwin, that they were trying to resuscitate Darwin as a Christian. And this is all part of what seemed to me to be a sociological operation.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize it as such whenever I was in it, though.
Yeah.
Am I crazy? Am I crazy, Courtney?
No, I see, I kind of see a lot of that where they're trying to Christianize things, but they're really, smuggling in a pantheistic worldview but
Right.
under the veneer of it being, I call it Christianese, like legalese. It's under the language that sounds very Christian, so it's I think it's very deceptive. So, and unfortunately, a lot of Christians do subscribe to it. It's not for me to tell people what to believe or what to follow, but I get concerned when I see it looks like very intentional manipulation and deception.
Well,
But
see, this is why, at least for me, in terms of faiths, I really do think it's better for believers to stay away from organized groups.
yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I say that all the time because organized groups have a tendency to be corrupted and
I'm not gonna be prejudicial here. The older organized groups, the ones that say they're over 1,000 years old, those are the most likely ones you need to stay away from
right. Yeah.
because they're probably the easiest to co-opt.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Well,
know I have associates that are in those groups that won't like me to hear me say that, but
right, right.
it's just my observation of what's going on. That's what go. And I will add that recently I've decided that looking at the way social media works, let's say that you are a devout Christian
Mm-hmm.
and that you only do your assemblies at home and you don't subscribe to any other institutional group, but you listen to a channel that has 700,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Right.
There's really no difference.
No.
They got you.
In some ways,
They got you.
I think in some ways that's more dangerous because now you're not, there's something about in person kind of experience and relationship that does create some sort of checks and balance. I mean, it's very
Yes,
different
I
to look
agree.
in the eye, than it is to be a part of this online community where you don't have
You
the
have
emotion.
no way to know, you have no way to know what their life is like
Yeah.
offline. No way. You have no way that they could just be the most lying, satanic people, and you wouldn't know because you have no interaction with them.
Yeah. Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah. I very much see that. I think again it's about shifting the Overton window. Right now they're really trying to capture the right, quote unquote, and so a lot of the right are more religious, more traditional. So that veneer is going to be more palatable to them, the Christian veneer. But I don't think that. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of it is all that authentic. And this is not to say all of it. You're seeing these
no,
people who are recent converts and they're talking about Christ consciousness, which is not Christian.
right,
you know,
right.
and
Exactly,
it's a
exactly.
so they're pushing people.
Just
Yeah,
inserting Eliu here again.
yeah. What would he say?
Effective propaganda is mostly true.
Yes. Okay. That was one of the most interesting things I thought he said because it's one of the things I keep saying is that they weaponize truths. And it's whenever they're, dripping these truths, it's like you have to ask why now, right? Like for Well, nobody was talking about this 20 years ago. Why? Why is now the time that suddenly this is the revelation? Yes, it may be true, but oftentimes it's out of context.